Welcome to the Morning Ritual Podcast, meditations and conversations to set the tone for your day. I'm your host, Lily Balch, and today we have Terri Cole, the boundary boss, on the podcast. This is a very full circle moment. I have been listening to Terri's podcast for many years. I'm going to say 4 years now. And she, without even knowing it, she inspired me to start my own podcast, The Morning Ritual. And then just a few months ago, her team reached out saying, we want to be on The Morning Ritual. And it was such a beautiful, cool full circle moment. So needless to say, I am super pumped to have Terri on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm super pumped to be on the show, Lily.
Oh, thank you for coming on. So, as we know, your first book, I know we have a second one coming up, which we'll talk about in a moment, but your first book is called The Boundary Boss, right?
Boundary boss, yes.
Yeah, Boundary Boss. So, Terri's podcast, The Terri Cole Show, is truly all about boundaries, and it's really helped me understand A, what a boundary is, and B,
Mhm.
having healthy boundaries, how much it affects my life, my relationships, and just overall well-being. So just to ground the listener, because we use this term boundary a bunch, could you
Mhm.
give us a really clear definition so we're all on the same page of what a boundary is and maybe a little bit about why they're so important?
Sure. I want you to think about your boundaries like your own personal rules of engagement, which basically just lets other people know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. According to me, your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, meaning your non-negotiables. So it's not enough to just know them, which, Lily, as you know, most people don't even know them, their preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers, but you have to know them and then have the ability to readily communicate them when you so choose. And so, right, because just knowing them, of course, isn't that helpful if the people in your life who need to know where you're at don't know it because you don't say it. So, why are boundaries important? Because if you think about what your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers are, they're not just the things that make up your boundaries, they're also the qualities that make up you as a person, like who you actually are. So many of us were indoctrinated into the cult of nice and learned to be good girls. And, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, as they told us growing up. And so most people, the reason I wrote an entire book on boundaries, and because nobody knew what they were. Nobody knew how to get them. There was all this bad information about boundaries out there that if you have good boundaries, you have to be bitchy, you have to be mean, you have to be caustic, you have to be selfish, all these things that are completely untrue. And people, especially the women in my practice, very capable, high functioning, very much like you and probably all your friends, like these get it done type people. And yet none of them, like this was its own epidemic of people not understanding why they were in pain. And I think that for myself, like, why was I drawn to this work? Like, why I could have written, I've been a therapist for 27 years. I could have written about a lot of things. But I think that it's true. They say you teach what you most need to learn. And I think that for me, I was a boundary disaster for sure. It took years to become a boundary boss, took years to master the art and even understand what it was. But once I did, then I couldn't unsee the fact that every person who walked in my therapy office, no matter what their presenting problem was, I could just follow the dots backwards to the fact that they did not understand how to express their preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers. And I think that the myths about boundaries really get in the way, right? Where people feel like if you have good boundaries, you're saying no all the time, you're verbally punching people in the face, you're mean, and I think that that gets in the way of a lot of people even wanting to become masterful at boundaries. But with my therapy clients, what I was able to do is connect the dots for them. The same way that I, in my 20s, thought that the problems were all outside of me. I thought if my boss just hadn't been a jerk, and if my boyfriend just hadn't been unfaithful, and if my best friend hadn't blah, blah, of course, a good therapist was like, hello, who's the common denominator in all of those things? Oh, that would be you and your shitty boundaries. And that really was a wake up where I was like, oh, it's not other people taking advantage of me. It's me serving myself up on a platter and not being aware that that's what I'm doing, then blaming other people for the boundaries I'm not setting or for the truth I'm not telling.
I love that. The truth I'm not telling. So this boundary work is really about living authentically, honestly, upfront, being like
Mhm.
truthful to who you are and what you want. And I'm in my early 30s now, but my 20s, yeah, I didn't know what a boundary was. And
Mhm.
recovering people pleaser, all the things you said, grew up to be kind, um, sorry, nice. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
Yep.
And as I got better at boundaries, life became so much less stressful. Like just the levels of stress would go down because it's simple. It's like a
Mhm.
simplification of life because you're just
Yep.
honest and upfront.
Yes. And that is simple. And just because it's simple, it's not easy. So we make that distinction very clearly that it's so important to know that there is a possibility of simplifying, but there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of conditioning that, in the first book, I walk you through no matter where people are in their boundary journey. You don't know what a boundary is, or you're actually pretty decent at it. I take you from wherever you are to wherever it is that you want to go. And all of my books are for people who are feeling a lack of satisfaction to a degree, right? Someone will say, well, I don't mind. I'm a people pleaser and that's the way I am and I like it. I'm like, yay, go you. Like I am literally not sitting in judgment or saying that I know how people should be happy. I do know that it is my dharma to help people lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy in life, because that's when we can be of the most service to the greater good, right? If we're struggling within our personal relationships all the time, if that's the drama in our life, if we're struggling with addiction, if we're struggling with can't get the career going, that becomes the thing. We can't rise above that to do the work that we really, all of us, like we are so called in this moment in history, in this moment in time. We need everyone to do what they can to be of service. It's less about what's in it for me when you're healthier, and it's more about how can I help? How can I be of service? Because there's an overflow of our life force energy, and there's an overflow of we're not in a scarcity mindset. We're feeling, the healthier you are, the more you have legitimately to give to others. And hey, I'm not saying that's the reason to do it. You could not have that be a part of your dharma, and that's fine. But there is something to be said about the healthier you are, which means you know how to set boundaries, you know what your limits are, you are so clear about your deal breakers, about what that does in your relationships, that deepens the intimacy in your relationships. Because when you're saying yes, when you'd really rather say no, you're really giving people corrupted data about who you are.
Yeah, yeah. And it invites the other person to then have their boundaries. I think with friendships that I have in my life, with my partner, with my family, when I'm, clear with my boundaries, I can sense them more easily speaking up about their own. And so it's a little
Yep.
contagious and super into it, super into it. So another thing I want to talk to you about is this term that you coined, high functioning codependency. And ever
Mhm.
since I've picked up your book and I'm reading about this, I'm seeing it left and right. So can we talk
Mhm.
about what that is?
Yes. So this is the new book, which is drops October 15th, 2024. And it's a guide to breaking the cycle of high functioning codependency. That's what the book is about. So I coined the phrase because the women in my therapy practice, so these are highly capable, successful, very competent, women, when I say successful, I don't necessarily mean a CFO or a CEO or a pop star, right? I mean women who just know how to get it done, whatever the it is. And I would see all this over functioning and over giving and over feeling, almost like all of this behavior where I would talk about, because one of the aspects of codependency is over functioning and under functioning in relationships. And I would point out like, oh, hey, this is a codependent dynamic that I'm seeing. And at the moment I would mention the word codependent, these women would be like, oh no, hell no, lady, that is not me. I don't know who you're talking about. Everyone's dependent on me, Terri. Don't you realize I'm making all the money? I'm managing the crap out of everyone and the schedule and the life and the house and the food and all the things. So I realized, I was like, oh, they don't understand that there is a much more expanded definition of codependency. They were thinking about Melody Beatty, codependent no more. You must be enabling an alcoholic if you are a codependent. I can't tell you how many times clients would say, why, I'm not involved with an addict, or I'm not an addict. And I'm like, yeah, man, that is not it.
Hmm.
So then I started looking and saying, but this demographic, which is my demographic, which of course this flavor of codependency that I was seeing in them is my own flavor of codependency, so to speak. I was like, this is specific though, and this is different. So I started doing like massive sort of social research with my clients and just copious notes and just really being like, what is different? And what I could see that was different than really just the not being involved with an addict necessarily. And you can be, that still is codependency, but it's such a limited scope, right? Is that those of us who are high functioning codependents can have a tendency to be codependent with the world, not just people, right? I was like indiscriminate in my 20s. I could become codependently invested in my hairdresser, my mailman. I did. I mean, these are not just like I did actually, where I'm feeling overly responsible for acquaintances, friends, family, and perfect strangers. I mean, I literally opened the book in the introduction. I'll tell a quick story where I was on a platform going back to New York City from Long Island, where I used to go to Long Island once a week to see a therapist because I didn't want to get a new therapist. That's insane. I would literally take a train an hour and then I would walk a mile at night by myself, go to therapy, walk a mile back to the train, and then I would get back to the city at midnight. Like, you're insane. But anyway, I really, really like that therapist, apparently. So I was standing on the platform and I see a kid. He's like in a kind of like a rocker sort of t-shirt, skinny kid. And I'm thinking, it's already 10:15 at night. Keep in mind, this is the late 80s. I'm like, what is this guy's deal? Like, what is this little kid? Now he's 19, I'm probably 22. You know what I mean? But I was still already, I'm maternally being like, what is he doing? So we get on the train, I started talking to him. I'm like, what are you doing? I knew he wasn't from New York. And he was like, oh, I got hired to drive a car back to Indiana. And then the gig got canceled. I just called them. Keep in mind, there was no cell phones, people. He called them from the payphone and the gig had gotten canceled. And I was like, well, what are you doing? He's like, just going to go back and I'm going to sleep in the station. I was like, wait, what station are you sleeping in? He was like, Penn Station. I was like, yeah, no, man, you're definitely not doing that. So you'll come home with me. I did not know this kid, but I knew if he slept in Penn Station, he was going to get mugged. It was the 80s. New York was even rougher than it is now. And that's an example of, I felt it was a compulsion. I couldn't have just been, there are many more appropriate things I could have done. Could have given him some money to get a snack. I could have said, hey, I don't think Penn Station's your best bet. Find a hostel. I could have done a lot of things, but I couldn't because I really felt the moment I knew of his plight, which he didn't even think was a plight, right? I thought it was a plight. I felt responsible to fix what I saw was a problem. And listen, I was lucky that Billy wasn't a serial killer and that he came, and I didn't even call my roommate, right? Because again, no cell phone. So I was like, she'll be fine. And she was like, obviously you couldn't let him sleep in Penn Station. I was like, correct. And, he left with that incident the next day. So that it's not that that was such a big deal, but the reality is, anybody listening and you yourself, you might have your own Billy stories. It may not be as extreme as that, But think about people who you meet and you feel responsible for. Someone who tells you their problem and you immediately want to auto fix, auto advice. I have ideas, I have thoughts for you. Like the compulsion to fix other people's stuff is a part of this high functioning codependency, which I think I make the distinction between sort of regular everyday codependency because I didn't see that in the regular codependency. So when I started with my clients, when I started giving them the new definition, high functioning codependency, they were all very much like me, I'm the problem, it's me, with their hands up without shame, right? Without feeling bad. So just adding the high functioning, they felt identified in that. And then they understood what codependency was, which, according to me, it's you being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the decisions, the relationships, the financial situations of the people in your life
Hmm.
to the detriment of your own internal peace.
Hmm.
Right. So keep in mind, Lily, right? We're all lovers. We all want the people that we love to win. We're all invested in the happiness of our people. That's just being women. But this is an overinvestment where we actually take it on in a way that it is not ours. There's a lot of confusion with high functioning codependency about what is my side of the street and what is your side of the street. And when
Hmm.
you're a high functioning codependent, you feel like you got to clean the whole neighborhood and beyond.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think for me, because this is something I've definitely had to work on, is I can feel it in my physical body when I'm taking somebody else's stuff on.
Mhm.
And it's like this, I have to literally say in my head, I am handing this back. Because I
Yep.
really can take it on a physical level. And that's why
Yes.
like this work of mindfulness and meditation and yoga and checking in with your body and having that nice intimate relationship with yourself, you can more quickly pick up on, oh my gosh, this isn't mine and I'm handing it back. So with high functioning codependency, what are some of the like warning signs we can look out
Uh-huh.
for? What does that look like and feel like?
Well, you made a great point about the having an intimate relationship with your body. And I think that most high functioning codependents who are not in recovery, because there's no cure per se. It's like any addiction. We can get into recovery though. Um, I think that we do not listen to our bodies because our minds are so strong and we are, I mean, I can say for myself, it's like head down, get it done, whatever that means. And I can't tell you how many clients have said, "Oh my God, I didn't even go to the bathroom today at work. I worked for 12 hours straight, or I didn't eat anything, right? I just was so had to get done what I was getting done." Like there's this way of ignoring or being cut off from the body. One of the stories, I have success stories at the end of Too Much, the book itself. And one of them is a woman who super successful, was on Wall Street, for 5 years, literally worked every day of the year for 5 years straight. I think she took 2 days off, 2 years of those five, but met her husband, got married, had five kids in 8 years. So she spent 8 years birthing or breastfeeding, like, hello. And then finally in her mid 30s, after the end of those 8 years, she just hit a wall and she just like cracked and was basically saying, and she had been an athlete as well, went to Harvard, like, was super, all of this was like so high functioning. It was a lot. And how she just learned as an athlete to ignore the pain in her body, to play through an injury. And this was encouraged. This was rewarded. In fact, it was like, wow, how amazing she is. And it took her hitting that wall and sort of having a breakdown, telling her husband, like, I need a break. I need to, I mean, she didn't end up going anywhere, but she did get a break and get some help because she also was doing it all herself, even though they were very comfortable financially. She didn't, it was like she really felt compelled. She had two first generation American parents. Her dad was German, her mom was Japanese. It's like there was so much pressure. And yet what she was able to figure out after that was getting exactly what you're saying, dialed into her body. She now leads retreats, helps other high functioning codependent women, you know, get through this and start to listen to the wisdom of their bodies and learn to slow down. And she talks really eloquently about mom guilt and
Mm.
about how self-care is so important. So there is a way into recovery from high functioning codependency. So let's talk about, back to your original question, the signs. Like, what can we look out for? How do we know, like, what's a red flag? Well, first of all, if you see yourself in any of these signs and symptoms, do not feel bad, right? Like we all are the way we are for reasons. So again, I feel like we want to remove the shame in what we're doing. And just, Deepak would talk about, the highest level that we can get to is becoming the observer of ourselves without judgment, but with like radical curiosity, like, that's interesting. Like, why am I compelled to do that? So symptoms, well, auto advice giving is one. Like just always having a solution for people, always having a thought, always having a connection, always having a book that you want to send them or a website that you would like them or an article you want them to read. Somebody comes and they're talking about, even if they're not talking about a problem, I would find a lot of times if someone would just be telling me something, I would have a better way for them to do what they were doing. I would be like, oh, but have you heard about this? There's breakthrough, just always suggesting. So there's that. Then we have anticipatory planning, where you're going to be with certain people. Let's just say you have a difficult family member and you're already ahead of it. You're already thinking about, I'm going to make sure I have the thing that he likes to drink. I'm going to make sure that he doesn't have to sit next to this person because they fight. Like you're already. And I'm not just talking about, when we are high functioning, we plan, right? You're going to have a dinner party. Obviously, you're planning, getting what people can and cannot eat, right? Their list. That's not this. That's normal planning so that someone who doesn't eat gluten will have something to eat at your dinner party. Anticipatory planning in this way is more like we're endlessly trying to avoid conflict from happening before it happens. We're like, we've got the antennas up. We can see, we walk into a room. Most of HFCs that I know in my life and have helped in my practice in all these years are empaths. Many are highly sensitive people, meaning that you have an acute sensitivity to sight, sound, crowds, energy. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm a massive empath. And these can be our superpowers if we get into recovery from high functioning codependency. Because if you don't, you will end up burnt out, right? Because there's only so long that we can have the foot on the gas in that way, emotionally, energetically, psychically, without you just, like I was talking about with my friend, Vivian, that you just smash into a wall at some point. So other signs and symptoms, resentment. I mean, the first thing that I really look at is I have my clients or people in my courses do a resentment inventory, because this will tell us where probably you're over functioning. This will tell us where probably you need a boundary that you're not setting. Because with being an HFC, a lot of times we have disordered boundaries. So either they're too malleable or they might be rigid. And that doesn't mean they're good, right? Because you can have different boundaries, right? We have healthy boundaries. And then on this end of the spectrum, we have porous boundaries, which are too malleable. And on this end of the spectrum, we have rigid boundaries, which are too hard. And when you're an HFC, another indication can be hyper independence.
Hmm.
We don't really love to depend on other people, where we're kind of like the I got it girls a little bit. You know what I mean?
Oh, Terry, I know what you mean.
I know you do, Lily. I can tell by your face. You're like, yes. Let me see. What other symptoms are there? I feel like we've actually covered all. Oh, auto accommodating is another one.
Hmm.
And this again is in the greater world and in our closer relationships, where I tell the story in the book. And I also, it's funny, I just threw something up on YouTube about this experience I had a couple of years ago, and it went viral. I don't know, 120,000, downloads in 28 days or something, where I knew I was like, that was before when I was deciding to write the book on this topic. And I was like, is this the right topic? I think it is. It feels like it is. And after that experience, I was like, it definitely is. Every person who is writing in about this. So anyway, the experience was this. I was in the city getting my color done, and it was super busy. I never go on a Saturday usually, but it was Saturday. So it was like the sinks were slammed, so many people. And I've got like a 10-minute mask on my hair, and I'm like laying in a sink, and the sink line is getting long. And like you, a normal person would be, maybe I'd be meditating, could be listening to a podcast, or there's a lot of things I could have been doing, but I was not doing those things. I was worrying about the sink flow. I was like, I should tell the assistant that I could move because I don't need to sit in the sink while my hair. So I flag her over. I'm like, hey, I can sit anywhere. I don't care. And she was like, yeah, lady, I think we got it covered, seeing as how we do this every week of the year. You don't need to be taking responsibility for the sink flow, which of course she didn't say. And she was very nice. And then I had this epiphany laying there. I was like, oh my God, after 30 years, you're still feeling overly responsible for crap that has nothing, that is not your responsibility. It has nothing to do with you. Like, what is your deal? Now, what I hear from people in the world when I say that, they're like, oh, but you were just being thoughtful. You were just being nice. What's wrong with being nice? And here's the thing, if you can't not do it, it is not you voluntarily being nice. It is a compulsion, just like any other compulsion. So I wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, I don't want that poor lady to wait in line for the thing because I'm so nice. I was feeling like this is not being run the way that it should be run. There is no reason for me to be in the sink. They could be washing someone while I'm like, again, there was no space between my thought and my action. I immediately put my hand up once I got to a level of discomfort, right? A level of constriction. So I think we need to make the distinction that being controlling in that way isn't necessarily being nice. And one part of this aspect of being a high functioning codependent that we don't talk about, that people don't talk about, even with codependency very much, is that it's a bid for overt or covert control of someone else's situation, right? That was not my situation. And again, if you are I'm not saying that we can't be considerate, loving people. Of course we can. But what is the cost? Because this is why we care, Lily. Why do we care? If we're so efficient and we're so good at everything, right? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because what I can tell you, doing this behavior for 10, 15, 20 years, what's on the other side of that is empty relationships, anger and bitterness, and a life where nobody knows who you are. So the cost is so great and is so high that it's worth the discomfort now to learn how to build interdependent relationships. I depend on you, you depend on me. It isn't one person sort of controlling all the things and someone just going along to get along, you know?
Totally, totally. I was just thinking of, I recently opened up, so in January, and I'm sitting in it right now, a yoga
Mm,
studio here in London.
nice.
And it's the first week I was taking all the classes, wanting to get to know all the teachers, introduce all the students. Like I was like really involved. And in one meditation class, we lay down. I've got these gorgeous skylights. I'm looking up, and I hear a plane, which is an airplane. I have no
Mhm,
control over this airplane, and it's making the sound of an airplane like over our building while everyone's trying to meditate. And I was like,
mhm.
this is not okay. It's not perfectly quiet. And then I see, and I got really intensely like trying to make it perfect for everyone.
Yeah.
And I've been really shown my perfectionist tendencies as I'm trying to get this
Mm,
business up and running to the point of
yeah.
things that are so out of my control. I'm like, wait, what can we do? Trying to make it perfect for everyone. And I have a
Mhm.
sense that with these high functioning codependents, high achieving women that you work with, do you see a lot of perfectionists in this group?
Oh my God. Yes. There's like basically almost a whole chapter in the book on perfectionism. And I talk about it quite a bit. because it is just the sucker of joy, as we know, that anything joyful, perfectionism just kills. I want to say something quick too about what you said with the plane, and then we'll go to perfectionism. When I was at a Deepak Chopra event many years ago, my husband and I, it was a week-long meditation thing. You're meditating for like hours at a clip. And I wasn't the best meditator in the world at that point. I was still, yeah, this was 20 years ago. And I couldn't just stop judging everyone in the room. I just wanted to kill everybody. And he says, just out of nowhere, you know, I know you think that the people sitting in front of you, blowing their nose or opening their candy very loudly, are ruining your meditation, but you misunderstand. They are your meditation.
Hmm.
I was like, oh my God, if that doesn't speak to perfectionism, that when we become more evolved within ourselves, we realize there is no perfection. And that it really helped me to see not just that I don't need perfect conditions to have a rock solid meditation practice. My apartment in the city, the fucking garbage truck would be backing up and beeping. And I would just be thinking, part of my meditation. It's all part of my meditation. And then I brought that thought and that feeling into my own perfectionistic tendencies to really get, and I mean, I've been in recovery from perfectionism for a long time now, because I'm just turned 60, but for years I wasn't, thinking how life is messy, love is messy, sex is messy, friendships are messy, transformation is messy, growth is messy. All of it is messy and beautiful and scary and painful and delightful. So we have to decide, are we here? Are we up for all of it? Bless the mess. Because if you can't, you will endlessly be like going against the tide in life. Just stop swimming upstream, flip over and float. It's okay. Allow things to fall into place with ease and grace. And if they don't, have faith, right? That you are strong enough to deal with an uncomfortable conversation, an uncomfortable moment. You can make that, if it happens again, or if you preface it with people, with your yoga classes and saying, you'll have many opportunities, right, to basically allow the noise of the world to become your meditation. And when we stop thinking that we have to control it, it's so funny. When Deepak said that, I felt really called out because I was like hating on the people in front of us because the person had a cold and they kept blowing their nose. And I was like, can you get out of this room? Like, what are you doing here? You're sick. Go to your room, or whatever. And I realized that was just a distraction. That like my job in being in a meditation retreat was to focus on my own friggin' side of the street and stop judging the crap out of the rest of the neighborhood, which I was able to do. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because it was super helpful for me, where it changed what my goal was with my meditation practice.
Yeah, like you say, bless the mess. I was gonna say embrace the
Indeed.
mess, but bless the mess sounds so much better.
Yes.
And it's true, life is freaking messy, and perfectionism is such a thief of joy. And I know we all have our own stories and our own whys, and we don't want to judge those whys. We want to stay curious. But with
Mhm.
high achiever or high functioning codependents, these high achieving perfectionist women and people that you see, why is it so hard to just be messy, to fail, to be imperfect,
Mhm.
to switch off and not get shit done? Like,
Because
would,
part of it is that our identity has been very built up in our achievements, right? Getting it done. It was so hard for me to allow myself to not be perfect, to really see, to ask for help. I mean, you move into the end of the book too much. The last chapter is called Surrender, right? Because for us HFCs, when you're not in recovery, surrender, what? Never, Never. I'll be a bloody pulp on the ground, dude. I will never surrender. You're right, because of what it meant in my mind. And through my own evolutionary process and helping thousands, tens of thousands of women go through this themselves, allowing other people to add value to our lives, letting someone pick up your bag and put it in the friggin' cab. I was always I got it, girl. The guy's opening the door. I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, why? And also realizing that you don't have mutuality in your relationships. If you are managing, nobody wants to be managed. And if you're really managing your partner or whomever in your life, that is a control thing. That is not a love thing. And so, how do we deepen our relationships? How do we step away from these behaviors, especially relationally? Because when you think about high functioning codependency, yes, perfectionism can be an aspect of it. But what we're really talking about is how do we relate to the people in our lives? That's what it's a relational situation that we're talking about. So instead of, I'm just going to start with one thing that I know that people can do, and it's an kind of an easy shift. Again, a simple shift that might not be easy to make. If you're the person that people come to, if everybody wants to pick your brain because you have it together so much, if you are the auto advice giver of all the things, the next time somebody comes to you, or they don't come to you, but you have a great idea of what they should do, instead of giving your great idea, you're going to start to learn to ask expansive questions. Your best friend comes to you and says, all right, I have this situation. Instead of, even if immediately you have the answer in your mind of what you know she should do, quote unquote, you're not going to say that. You're going to say, okay, well, let's start with, what do you think you should do? What does your gut say? Because that's literally the most important part of this. And then you're going to shut up. And even if your friend says, I don't know, you could say, okay, but let's just play a game. What if you did know? What would it be? Just what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about this decision you need to make, right? There are ways that we can be in the foxhole with the people that we love without centering their situation on our grade A advice. Because
Hmm.
it's what we're doing, whether you mean to or not, it is what you're doing. You are literally taking the emphasis off their problem and bringing it to your solution. When that might be helpful to some people, and it might be really off-putting to other people. And how do you feel when you're in a situation where you want to vent about something and the person immediately is telling you what to do? I have a solution. The perfect example of this, I have a friend, I was talking to her about flying. I spent a lot of time in LA because I have clients and whatever. So, but I live in New York. So I was like, I'm flying in, and I always stay with her because she has a room and whatever. And she was, she'd said to me 5 years ago, why don't you fly into Bob Hope, Terry? LAX is awful. I hate LAX. I go, 5 years ago, I go, I don't mind LAX. I like it. I have better options for cars. So, like 15 times after that, she'll be like, why aren't you flying into Bob Hope? I'm like, that's not even what we're talking about. I don't want to fly into Bob Hope. Stop friggin' suggesting it. But it's like this knee-jerk reaction. She doesn't like LAX. She wants me to have a better experience according to her, but she's not basing it on me. She's basing it on her. And so part of it, and listen, she's a lovely, loving friend. We've been friends for 30 years. That's just an example of
Yeah.
where I feel unseen and unheard in that conversation. And I mean, I made a joke of it. I mean, she doesn't do it anymore because finally I was like, Claude, stop. I do not want to fly into Bob Hope. Stop saying it. But how the compulsion, the thing we have to deal with, if you identify with being an HFC, is we have to deal with this knee-jerk desire to make a suggestion, right? We have to deal with that within ourselves. But if you have this other thing to say, which is, okay, most importantly, what do you think? And this is with kids too, people who have children. Stop doing so much for your kids. Stop it. It is not helping them. You are not preparing them for the world. It is your fear that they're going to fail that you're doing. As parents, we have to let our kids fail. We have to teach them deductive reasoning and critical thinking. And always with a kid, I don't care what age, what do you think you should do?
Hmm.
Of course, we're going to tell the kid if they're a 9-year-old, we're going to help them problem solve. But you can teach them to start thinking in this way by not needing to be the hero of everyone else's story. It's much more loving to be the supporting player and allowing the people you love to be the hero in their own stories.
I love that. Ask expansive questions. Well, just ask questions. Hey, Terri,
Yes,
why is it that you like flying into LAX? Oh, the cars. Okay, I'll stop, you know?
yes, yes.
That's a
Instead of
great
making
example.
assumptions, it is because it's like it's almost like making the assumption that other people are exactly like us. But it's also so like I was like embarrassed. I have to be honest. When this all came to light for me, it's in this pivotal story that's in the book about one of my sisters and addiction and living in the woods with a crackhead without running water and without electricity, like true story, and how much I was doing everything in the world to get her out of there and throwing money at it and sending books and crying to my therapist about it. And the wake up call for me was with my therapist being like, Terri, what makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn in this lifetime?
Hmm.
And I was like, well, I guess we can both agree she doesn't need to learn it with a crackhead in the woods without running water. I mean, can we agree on that? And she was like, no, because I'm not God. And I don't know what it needs to be for her. But do you know what's going on for you? And I was like, apparently not, Bev. So clue me in. And she said, you've worked really hard to create a harmonious life for yourself. And your sister's dumpster fire of a life is really messing with your peace. And you really want to fix it so you can get back to feeling peaceful.
Hmm.
And I realized I was like, oh my God, like I'm so codependent. I am not letting her have her own experience. I'm making her experience be about me and how disruptive it is to my life. And I was like, so what do I do? And she said, draw boundaries. You don't need to let her talk to you about this abusive boyfriend because every time she would, she'd get off the phone and be like, I feel so much better. And I'd get off the phone and be like, I wanted to jump off a bridge. Like I'd be crying my eyes out and feel like a toxic waste site. It was like somebody just dumped all this stuff on me. And then I was able to do that and say, hey, I love you. And if you ever want to get out of there, I'm here for you. But I can't talk about this with you because it is so painful. So I'm going to step back. And within 9 months, she called me and was like, hello, are you still my person if I want to get out of here? And I was like, I'm putting on my shoes right now. Picked her up. And the end of the end on that story is she went back to school. She got into recovery herself. But Jenna became the hero of her own story, not me.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. So, say we have a listener who is like, oh my gosh, I know I'm in a codependent relationship. Like, hands up. Is it that they can work on boundaries with their partner and save this relationship? Or is it like, okay, this is,
Right.
you can't come back from this. Where are we at
Yeah.
there? I mean, I think it varies each relationship,
Sure.
but what does
Well,
that path look like? The recovery.
yeah, I mean, I think that here's the thing. Before we bring in the other person at all, no matter what their relationship is like, it's all we go in first always with the work that I teach, with the way that I teach it, because it's all based on the 5 pillars of transformation that I created throughout the many years I've been doing this. So we start with self-awareness, we move into self-knowledge, we move into self-acceptance, self-compassion, and then the fifth is self-love, self-celebration, self-mastery. So we must go in. So you can even start by going, like because everyone's codependent relationship presents differently. For a lot of people, it's doing. We're over functioning for people. So one thing that people can do if they're identifying with this is you can make 2 lists. One is going to be your resentment inventory, because that's going to tell us a lot. And then the other is I'm going to ask you to try to identify things that you're doing in this relationship for the other person that they can and probably should be doing for themselves. So that's a start because we need a GPS to point us towards what behaviors relationally are problematic. How do I figure this out? And in the book, I walk you through the process of doing your HFC blueprint, which is basically a relational blueprint. So we look at, where did I learn that this is the way I should be relating? Like, where did I
Mm.
learn that? Was it modeled behavior from the family of origin? What kind of country, culture, society did I grow up in? Because all of those things, what is my lineup in the family system? Am I the youngest? Am I the oldest? All of those things come together and make our relational blueprint. So it's very impactful to know that about yourself, because that also gives us a place to start.
Cool. Cool. Terri, this has been so helpful, and I want to have you share how the listeners can learn more about you, work with you, get your book, listen to your podcast. Could you just bundle that up for us?
Sure, all the things. Well, first of all, I have a gift for your audience. So they can go to terricole.com/HFC for high functioning codependency. And there you can take the HFC quiz if you're wanting to know sort of how your high functioning tendencies, how are they presenting? Because there's different ways. Some people are like the hyper helpers of the world. Other people are doing it in other ways. So there's like 6 or 7 archetypes that you'll be able to figure out. It's just a great place to start. And then we also have a free HFC morning ritual kit, which will help you walk through a morning ritual.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Well, Terri, thank you so much. And we're going to end this episode the way that we always do, with just a full breath in, a complete breath out, and have a wonderful day.